Hello, and welcome to what I think is a final talk of the fantastic selection of presentations we've had over the last 2 days, thanks to this wonderful conference. So I'm going to finish up with, I think, a topic that comes up quite often with a lot of my clients. And so I thought this would be a good topic to approach. You know, I think divorce often, we look at divorce and we think it's just the divorce process. But I think that the divorce actually crosses so much more than that. There's so much going on before the actual practical legal process goes on. And there's equally so much that goes on after the divorce, I suppose, legalities are finalized. And that's really what I'd like to touch upon is how do we learn to communicate so that we can minimize the conflict that we can get dragged into once the divorce and all of the decisions have been made or the paperwork has been signed. So making a decision to leave a marriage is a significant life-changing event. And once we get to the end of the legal process, signing of the paperwork, the childcare agreement, the financials, we come to a point where we have to then start looking at how do we start then picking up the pieces of our life? How do we start moving forward? What do we want in this next chapter of our life? What do we want more of? And equally, what do we want less of? That's one of the questions that, I often discuss with clients is, where do we want to go from here? Because it can be quite a confusing time in our life because we're suddenly, during the divorce process, you're almost running on this sort of negative adrenaline that keeps you going to the end of that process. And then suddenly it's all over and you have to start looking at, right now, what's next? You know, when, you know, when we have children in common, this really means that actually this person that we are now separating ourselves from financially, physically, we're moving into our own house. However, they will always be in our lives in some shape or form because we have these children together. So we have to move forward in a way that will allow us to maintain some level of civil conversation, hopefully, a friendly conversation, communication, but we have to start somewhere. So divorce changes the dynamics of lots of our relationships. Not only the relationship we had with the person that we were once married to, but it can also change the dynamics of extended family members, of friends we might have had in common, neighbors if we've had to move house. So learning to communicate with all of these broken relationships can be quite challenging, especially when emotions are still raw. You know, even at the end of the divorce process, our emotions will still be in a state of flux. So I'll tell you a little bit about me. My name is Salma Khan. I'm a divorce coach, having trained with the DCA, and I now, over the last 3 years, practice as a divorce coach. For me, the most challenging aspect of my own divorce was certainly, I mean, all stages were challenging, but I think for me, the most challenging was probably the post-divorce stage, which for me lasted a number of years. I had come out of a mentally abusive relationship, my confidence, my self-esteem, my identity had all been eroded. And once a divorce was finalized, we started life without actually, apart from physically separating, we hadn't really separated until many years later from an emotional perspective. Because we didn't, at least for my ex-partner, he found it very difficult to accept that actually the dynamics of our relationship had changed. And I myself did not have the courage at the time to enforce those changes or to even consider those changes. I carried the norms that I had started accepting within the marriage into the first few years of post-divorce. So this is where I'd like to start, really. Assessing where you are at and where you would like to go is an important aspect of the post-divorce journey. However, prior to that, we need to start the healing journey. So we need to give ourselves some time to heal. And understanding the grief cycle is quite important in this aspect, because there will be days where you feel like you're moving forward, but equally there'll be days where you feel like you're going backwards. There'll be days where you're emotional. There'll be days where you're hurting, depending on the circumstances of your divorce and what may have happened during the divorce process, the level of conflict, if there was any physical, emotional abuse going on. All of these aspects will have an impact on how we start moving forward. So we need to allow ourselves and give ourselves permission to process those at our own pace. And equally, we need to understand that both parties, and we're not talking about fault here, both parties are to a certain extent going through the grief cycle and will often be at different stages of the grief cycle. If we don't deal with these emotions that are going on, the anger, the resentment, the sadness, the heartbreak, the pain of, losing what we thought was going to be forever. If we don't deal with these emotions, they go on to impact our future interactions with our ex-partner and with everybody else within our circle. And conflict impacts everyone involved. Conflict impacts us, takes away our energy, it sucks the energy, so that, we're already in a very difficult, emotionally difficult situation. We want to be able to focus those energies on healing rather than the conflict. It equally impacts our ex-partners, and more importantly, it impacts the children. So before we can learn to communicate effectively, now when I say effectively, I mean in a way that works for us, in a way that works for the people that we're communicating with, we need to let go of the past. And part of the journey of letting go of the past, and I'm not going to sit here and for 1 minute suggest that it's easy, but it's something that needs to be on our radar. So learning to manage the emotions that may be triggered during our interactions is all part of that learning journey. Looking at what went wrong and what part we played is all part of that journey. But the most important thing when it comes to communication is bringing up past events time and time again, whether you are doing that on your own. It's one of the things that I was very guilty of. Anytime that I had to myself, when I wasn't, at work, or I wasn't looking after the children, or I wasn't doing all of the other responsibilities that we have, any other time, I would sit and I would mull and go over and over and over past events, which only leads to further pain. Because as we all know, your brain can't tell the difference between whether an event is happening now or whether it's happened in the past. But when we bring up these past events during our communications with our now ex-partners, they just lead to further conflict and a breakdown of communication. And that's what we're trying to avoid, because the end goal here is for us to be able to foster a healthy environment for ourselves and for the children. And as harsh as it may sound, one of the things that I often discuss with clients is bringing up those past events that have happened, constantly, causing more conflict or aggravation around those. That cultural blame does not move us forward. It only keeps us stuck in the past. And the harsh reality is that the focus of our relationship now is not to fix the past. We can't fix the past. What's happened has happened. And in order to move forward, we need to learn to leave those things in the past. How do we do that? We could, as Mary was talking earlier, journal. We can work with a coach, work with a therapist, meditate, just learning to identify the lessons that we want to learn. Sometimes we go over past events because we're trying to make sense of them. We're trying to learn something from that particular event. That in itself can be helpful. But going over past events just to go over them over and over again actually leads, it's almost like we're punishing ourselves. And when we bring up past events in communication with our ex, suddenly the defenses go up. People don't like to be questioned. People don't like to be sort of fingers pointed at them. And actually, in reality, if you're already divorced and they were unable to apologize for the things that they have done that still hurt, it's unlikely that they're going to find it within themselves to do that now that you are divorced. So it seems almost counterproductive to keep being angry about things that you cannot change. And I think this is a really key one. To redefine the roles and set new boundaries. Your relationship has changed. You're no longer married. You, hopefully, after your financial agreement, are no longer financially dependent on one another. But you are co-parents. You're not partners. So you're now working, the communication that you need to have with your ex-partner should be focused on their children. What is best for them? What do you need to do for them? What do you need to organize for them? You don't have to, there'll be lots of decisions that need to be made depending on how old your children are when the divorce takes place. Lots of decisions that need to be made that may require both of you to be there, or at least to have an input. So we don't want to be in a position where either party make themselves completely unapproachable. The other thing to define and understand now is that your home is now your home. So you get to make the rules. You get to decide how you can create an environment of safety, respect, and love within your home. You get to redefine how you will be treated. So you no longer have to, and nor should you, accept certain behaviors that you may have accepted during the marriage, because you now have the opportunity to redefine those. You now have an opportunity to look at what behaviors make you uncomfortable. What behaviors do you feel threatened by? What behaviors make you feel disrespected? And what behaviors will you no longer allow into your life? And once you're able to identify those, you can then look to create the boundaries that you need to have in place. And I use the word rules because rules can be quite a harsh word. A rule is almost as if, well, it's absolutely non-negotiable. And there are certainly some behaviors which are absolutely non-negotiable. But there needs to be some flex there. But if we can establish these rules and boundaries early on, and then try our best to be consistent with them, because there's nothing worse when we send the mixed signals in our communication. So we need to be very clear about our expectations, what we are willing to do, what we are not willing to do, how willing we are to accommodate and flex, because obviously there has to be some flexibility there, but without sacrificing the things that are important to us. And we need to remain consistent in those. One of the examples that I often use with my clients is the example of a chocolate biscuit. And I said, setting a boundary and communicating that boundary is almost like when your child comes to you 10 minutes before dinner and says to you, "Mummy, can I have a chocolate biscuit?" And, it's not mega chaotic, dinner's almost ready, you're calm, and you say, "No, well, you can't have a chocolate biscuit now because we're going to have dinner in 5 minutes." And the child may be upset by that. They'll probably have a tantrum. They may even cry. They may even, get really upset. But you're going to stand firm, and they're going to go off and they'll have dinner, and then they'll get the chocolate biscuit. The next day, there's chaos. You're trying to cook dinner. You're on the phone. You might be trying to send off a work email. There's lots going on. And the child will come back to you and say, "Mummy, can I have a chocolate biscuit 5 minutes before dinner time?" And you just need, excuse me. And you'll say, "Yeah, okay, fine, just have the chocolate biscuit," because you're so overwhelmed that this is a fight that you don't want to have. So you give them the chocolate biscuit. Child goes away happy. They have the chocolate biscuit. They come back, they have dinner. They may not have dinner after the chocolate biscuit, but I think the important thing to understand here is what's stopping that child coming back the next day and asking for a chocolate biscuit? Because they have a 50-50% chance of getting what they want. So they will try again. And that's where the most important aspect of when we set boundaries is to be consistent. So if we don't want to be spoken to in a particular way, or we don't want to be treated in a particular way, or we want to be able to set a boundary, we need to be clear and we need to be consistent. One of the other things that can really help minimize conflict that occurs during communication and also improve our communication is to really organize, schedule, and plan, if at all possible. So schedule in the regular childcare agreements that you have with your ex-partner, and consider having a shared calendar so that both parties can be informed and updated. You don't necessarily need to be having the same conversations over and over again. Bear in mind that the outcome of a conversation can be very different depending on what else is going on in that person's life at that point in time. So this avoids unnecessary conversations that may lead to further upset. Plan your holidays, activities, and responsibilities as far ahead as is possible so that there's minimal last-minute panic, especially around childcare. Now, communicating with an ex-spouse or partner will not always be easy. It may not even be particularly pleasant. But we want to look at the long-term goal here. The long-term goal is for the benefit of your children. And the one thing communication should always aim to be is effective in this respect. So what can we do? The answers seem fairly obvious. Like, we communicate effectively at work. We communicate effectively outside with our friends and our loved ones. How often it can all go completely pear-shaped when it comes to communicating with our ex-partners. So in the next couple of slides, I'm just going to go over some of them will be fairly obvious. But I think when our emotions take over, sometimes obvious goes straight out the window. So the first thing is language. So effective communication really relies on your language and your choice of words. It's very difficult to sometimes control what you want to say or how it's going to come out when you're angry or you're resentful or you're upset or sad. And equally, sometimes the words, even if they are not aggressive or conflictual, they can be misconstrued depending on the mental state of the person that we're speaking to. So that's another factor that we have to take into account. So choose your words properly so that you can convey what you actually need to say. Away with the sarcasm as much as you may want to, because it will make you feel better at that point in time. But in the long run, it just leads to more conflict. Away with, falling into that trap of, but last time you did this and you always do this. Try to stay away from that kind of language, because it only gets people's defenses up. Certainly avoid any kind of name calling, shouting, screaming. In fact, Bill Eddy talks about the Biff rules, which is, you need to keep your communication, especially if there's a chance of conflict, is keep it brief, keep it informative, keep it friendly, but firm. If you follow those few rules, you won't need to go into a huge amount of detail. What you're doing is giving the minimal amount of information that you need to give to the other party in order for them to do what they need to do. And that is it. You can look up Biff on the internet. It's out there. They give you lots of examples of how to use it. And it's something that I think we should all be using, especially when there's a chance of conflict. The other thing that really impacts our communication is tone and delivery. So how you deliver a message, your tone of voice, your timing, are all aspects that we really need to consider when we're communicating, and even more so when we're communicating with an ex-partner. You know, it's not necessary that, in today's world at least, it's not necessary that all our communication or all our conversations have to be face to face or over the phone. So look for other avenues, especially if there's an element of fear there. I know in my personal experiences, I found it incredibly difficult to have telephone conversations with my ex-partner, because for a very long time after our divorce, he was very, very angry and unable to deal with the anger aspects of the divorce. So telephone conversations just didn't work for us. They always ended up in a huge amount of upset, a huge amount of conflict. So we had to look at other avenues, not only to safeguard myself, but to safeguard my children. So looking at other ways to communicate, such as email, written communication. There are lots of online apps now, like Family Wizard, that allow you to give the information that the other party needs without the need for any face-to-face conversation. You know, written communication. First, the one great thing about writing an email, or writing a letter, or writing a text message, is actually it gives us the space and the time to reflect on the words that we're using. So we're not necessarily under pressure. At least we shouldn't be. When something requires a response, the other thing to be really mindful of is that you don't need to respond straight away. Take your time, run it past somebody. If you feel like your language might be a bit difficult, or you're angry, or you're upset, run it past somebody that you trust before you send that message, before you send that email, so that you can get somebody with more of a neutral perspective to be able to just give you some feedback. But equally, the same when we're talking about a tone of an email or delivery of an email, we also need to look at what that piece of writing looks like. So avoid using capital letters and exclamation marks and underlining stuff or highlighting stuff, because actually they may be read in a written, in a voice which is actually unintended. And another aspect is timing. Timing can have a huge impact on how your message is heard, or whether it's even heard at all. So trying to have a serious conversation at the point where you're, like swapping the children over, probably not a good idea, for two reasons. One, the children may require your full attention at that point in time. And secondly, if the conversation doesn't go according to plan, then you're looking at this conflict unraveling in front of the children. So look at the timings. If there is something that you need to discuss that is important, could be quite emotive, then maybe you reach out to the other partner and fix a time where you can both actually sit down in a relaxed, civil manner and go over things. Body language. This is a really important one. Body language makes up almost 85% of what we communicate. So paying careful attention to it is probably a really good idea. So what is body language? We all know what body language is, right? Your facial expressions, your gestures, how you're standing, eye contact. We learn all these things. However, being aware of our body language when we're communicating with our ex-partner can make a real difference. There may be some real unconscious things that you're doing, like rolling of your eyes, not really listening unattentively, scrolling on our phones, your aggressive posture. your body stance. These all contribute towards a message that we are trying to put forward. So, really being able to relax ourselves before we come face to face, or thinking about what we're going to say when we pick up that phone to make a phone call, maybe even practicing what we're going to say, or making a list. One of the things that, we often work through with my clients is, if there is an important conversation to have and we're worried about how that conversation is going to go, obviously we can never predict how the other party will respond, but we can definitely look to practice the way in which we are going to deliver that message. And a really good idea is sometimes to just jot down the points. What is it that you'd like to say? What is it that you'd like to achieve at the end of that conversation? And what are you, so that you have a list, so that when the conversation veers off into a different direction, you can bring it back to the item that needs to be discussed. So what do you do when things don't go to plan, which happens? I think the first thing to realize is that you are allowed to take a step back. We need to accept that actually we won't always agree. And the intention must be for us to find some sort of middle ground for the sake of the children. All conversations don't have to end with a solution at that particular time. If a conversation is not going according to plan, if emotions are getting heightened, people are getting upset, both parties are getting upset, or one person is unwilling to listen at that point in time, you can take that conversation, end the conversation, come back to it. Pushing for a solution, pushing for an answer when emotions are already heightened just leads to more. And sometimes giving each other that time to consider what they want to respond, or to come back with an alternative perhaps, and then revisit an important conversation at a later time. I think it's also important to be as flexible as you can without compromising your boundaries. So this is not about sacrifice. This is about allowing each other, getting to a point you can both show each other respect for their time and their efforts. And sometimes that involves a certain level of flexibility, if possible. And really focusing on the end goal. What is your end goal here? What does this conversation, what does the outcome of this conversation need to be? Are you trying to agree on the holiday timetable? Are you trying to agree on who's going to pick up the children on what day? Yes, these are important decisions that need to be made. Is there time? Can we factor in some time so that both parties can go away and look at their calendars and see where they might be able to make some adjustments? So it's that kind of flexibility that I'm referring to. I'm not referring to backing down every time somebody makes a demand. So these are just some of the factors. I'm conscious that I'm going over time. It is a topic that I could talk about for hours. But it is about really looking at the bigger picture, really about reflecting on ourselves, to which part are we playing in the conflict? How can we safeguard ourselves, protect ourselves, but also be able to communicate effectively so that we can move forward? Thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been of value to you. Any questions before we move on to questions? I suppose if anybody needs to get in touch with me, you can go to my website. I am available on Instagram. And please do reach out if there's anything that I can help you move forward with. Thank you.
That was excellent, Salma. Thank you very much. I loved you reminding me about the timing. That's not something I automatically think about, maybe subconsciously, but not automatically. So that was a really good pickup. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Claire.
It was brilliant. For me, what the letting go is that it's something that clients need to be reminded a lot, and even personally, was one of my biggest lessons of
Yeah.
biting my tongue and refraining from
Yeah.
you
Refraining from saying the things
you betrayed me, and yeah, and just looking forward and thinking about the objective, not the purpose of having that communication or yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Salma. It's a great presentation. When I was at Cambridge, we used to video the consultants and GPs, and you're so right about body language. I mean, I know that's the research, but it is so much more powerful than what you say. Sometimes we would switch it off and just watch the silent video. It would be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the things that we often ignore is, you know, based on how we're standing or our facial expressions, everything, it can be so different to the message that we're trying to send out. And that creates so much confusion. That's, you know, so to be clear, yeah, absolutely. I think body language is so powerful, and just being able to actually create distance between, you know, when conflict is arising, to be able to step back and give yourself that distance can be really helpful sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I just love people watching, and I often look at their feet. See which way their feet are pointing. When they're talking in a group, look at which way their feet are pointing, and you can see the ones that want to escape or want to stay in or want to get closer.
I never thought about looking at the feet.
No.
Or it's a big telltale
you do
sign.
a lot online, no, as well, and so you only see half.
Yeah. I'm talking about in a group of people.
Yeah.
If you look at the relative positions of feet, it tells you a lot about the group dynamics.
I've got my builders downstairs. When I have my next conversation with them, I'm going to be checking out their feet. But you're not going anywhere yet.
Yeah. The other thing that I find with clients post-divorce is that they still allow their ex to live rent-free in their head, and trying to work out an eviction plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, that has to be one of the hardest things to disconnect with after.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the redefining comes in, because you can just go from, you know, once a divorce is over, to just fall into those same patterns of behavior that you were accustomed to because that's what was normal, quote. But I think it is really about looking at, you know, what is it that you deem to be normal, but you no longer want in your life, and how can you change that? Because I know I was very guilty of that. For years, I allowed my ex-husband to still continue being the bully that he was, just a bully that didn't live in my house. But, you know, it did, and until I didn't put those boundaries in, because he was allowed to behave like that because I wasn't doing anything to safeguard myself.
I have a client at the moment who we had a conversation about this the other day, because she was saying her friend keeps telling her what her ex is doing.
Yeah.
Oh,
So we put a boundary in around that.
yes.
Not necessary for me to know, please. I understand your motives might be intentionally good, but actually it's not helpful for me, because that brings him into her head.
Yeah.
And then they talk about it. So it doubly imprints it. And then she goes away and she's still got it. So sometimes it's about, right, what can you close down a boundary around to try and make that easier as a process?
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. That's a classic, isn't it? Where friend keeps chipping in.
Mm.
Yeah. I had a client recently who kept peering over the gate of where she used to live. Very understandable,
Oh.
just keeping herself stuck.
Mm.
Yeah.
Or the very common one of when there is the transition between homes and a parent is coming to pick up the children from the other house, that they I have a client that we sorted it out now, but he would just say, oh, because he was coming from far away, oh, I need to use the bathroom, the restroom, and with the excuse of entering and then checking everything.
Mhm.
And yeah, and
That makes me laugh because it's
breaching
taken
the
me,
privacy. Yeah.
it's taken me 10 years and a move of house to put that boundary in summer of last year, where I said, right, that's it. When you pick the kids up, you pick them up from the doorstep. And it was so liberating to finally say, because actually I was like, actually, this is now my house. I have moved. The previous house, there was also always some sort of ties there that it was the house that we had built together. And then now this is my house, and I
Very different.
choose who comes in through the front door and who doesn't. And it was a massive step, but I think it took me 10 years to get there, but I got there.
And I think that's something that clients often find so hard to understand, is that some of this stuff takes a very long time to actually deal with. They have this sense that actually they're going to be able to deal with everything. I was speaking to a client just a few minutes ago, and she was like, well, I'm just going to get all this stuff done. As soon as I move out the house, I'm going to be fine, and I won't be an overwhelm anymore. And I was like,
yeah, we bring us with us.
Yeah.
The high expectations.
Yeah.
And it's that if there are children, is that balance, no, of I want it amicable because I want to protect the children, and I know is there that, and I just want to have this good relationship. And if I'm being forceful, is that, what are the consequences of that, and all those thoughts that we have ourselves or the clients and so on.
Yeah, I've got another client who, she's taken over the mortgage of the house. She's bought their ex out. She's taken over the mortgage. He's not moved his stuff out. I was like, and how do you feel about that? I think we need some boundaries. But it's like she didn't even feel like she could.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, I had a client who just messaged me last week with photos of an outhouse that she has built. They've turned it into a library and a reading room. And she's been divorced. I've been working with her for about 3 years now. And the outhouse was always filled. It was falling apart. It was filled with her ex-husband's stuff who had moved out almost 3 years ago. She'd constantly been asking him to come and pick up the stuff. And then we got to a point where she decided that actually, if he wasn't picking it up, he probably didn't need it. So I encourage her to set a deadline and say, look, I have arranged for somebody to come and clear out the outhouse on this date. If there's anything in there you'd like to salvage, please come and pick it up before that. He didn't come back for anything.
Wow.
It was just a way of controlling the last aspect in that house. And I'm so happy for her, because she had it cleared out a few months ago. She's now had it renovated, and they've made it into the most gorgeous outdoor reading room for her and her daughter. It's just beautiful. And it's you know, it's getting rid of those things that are keeping you stuck in that situation.
Mhm.
Mm. Mm. Well, thank you. It was a great presentation.
Thank you, guys.